Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza, and happy Thanksgiving! I'm thankful for so many things, including all of you, for giving me your time and listening to my episodes, for sharing, rating, reviewing, subscribing, all that jazz. You're supporting me all while I'm getting my footing and learning as I go, and that's a huge deal, and I'm very grateful. I'm also thankful for my friends who told me to just do it and stop making excuses because now I have this thing to look forward to every week. I mean, this is already episode 4, and that might not seem like much, but I didn't think I'd even make episode 1. So it's a big win for me. Since Thanksgiving is this week, I'm going to dive in a little deeper into Thanksgiving today. Why do we celebrate it? When did it start? What were early traditions compared to current traditions, and have any traditions stood the test of time? Growing up, we'd always have Thanksgiving at my grandma's or my mom's cousin Linda's house. There was always turkey or ham, of course, but I have always been a sides and dessert girly. I'm in that kitchen, I'm tossing back pickle after pickle, bread roll after bread roll. I'm scooping up those rice potatoes and I'm downing them in butter or gravy. Oh, yes, and please do pass the creamed corn. Lefsa, she's there, and I'm smothering her with cinnamon sugar and butter. And that pumpkin pie, someone call the police because I'm murdering it. Oh, there's pudding, you say? I'll make room, don't worry. Football's on, my tummy's full, and I'm about to fall into my annual Thanksgiving Day coma. Times have changed. Like I said, I've always been a sides girl, so I've definitely removed turkey from my menu. Never cared for it much anyway. Since it's just the two of us for Thanksgiving, we usually keep it pretty low key. I can't cook much more than chili and soup anyway, so I'm not messing with a bunch of involved recipes. I've actually carried over a Christmas tradition my parents and I have, and that's having crab legs for dinner. I always miss Red Lobster's Crab Fest, so I get my own on Thanksgiving. Football will be on, don't worry. This year we get 3 games, including a Packers game. But I'll be honest, if I don't binge all of the new Stranger Things that's dropping on Thanksgiving Eve, it's going to be really hard for me to not watch it on Thursday. And I don't know if Cole will let me put him through that. I've already been rewatching all the previous seasons for the past week or so, and he's not exactly a fan, so we'll see. Speaking of the eve of Thanksgiving, I miss going home and seeing hometown friends. I don't know if this is common everywhere or if it's a Midwestern thing or if it's just like a college age thing, but getting a little sloshed or a lot, depending on your vibe, with your hometown friends at your local hometown bar just hits different on Thanksgiving Eve. And that hangover the next day, woo, it makes the food 10 times more delicious. So does that special little walk before dinner, if you know what I mean. Anyway, let's dig into Thanksgiving, shall we? And fair warning, this is not to be political or holier than thou, but I will be getting into some of the nitty-gritty of Thanksgiving. Blame it on the Addams Family Values movie for wokeifying my views of Thanksgiving. Wednesday's off-script improvised version made me realize Thanksgiving is more than just sunshine, hunky-dory, mashed taters, and turkey, you know? So to start, let's talk about what we're taught as kids, what we seemingly highlight in our celebrations of Thanksgiving still today. I call it Disney Thanksgiving. Growing up, we're taught that friendly pilgrims and friendly Indians, none of which are named, by the way, they're just generic friendly Indians, shared a 3-day feast in 1621 where everyone was just so happy and so grateful and there was peace on earth, right? As a kid, I interpreted the story in my imagination as having this huge, giant, long table outside with colorful leaves everywhere. Pilgrims are dressed in their little black suits and their hats with a buckle, and the Indians are dressed basically as they are in the Disney version of Pocahontas. Even the animals are enjoying the holiday. Everyone's passing a dish, laughing, hugging, the weather's perfect, all that good shit. This Thanksgiving myth we're taught is a story where religious freedom seekers bravely settle on new land and get help from the friendly natives. Of course, this is a very romanticized version of history, which became popular in the mid-1800s when English accounts of what happened resurfaced and fueled the American imagination during Manifest Destiny expansion. When I read that, I was like, what the hell is Manifest Destiny expansion? Well, it's a term coined by John L. O'Sullivan in 1845, and it's the belief that Americans were literally destined by God to expand westward across the entire North American continent. Basically, it was the idea that there was a God-given, sanctioned right to conquer the land and displace the, quote, uncivilized, non-Christian peoples who, Americans believed, did not take full advantage of the land. Simply put, it was religious justification wrapped in patriotism, wrapped in racism. The timing of this Manifest Destiny expansion was just too perfect, really. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase nearly doubled the size of the U.S., and by 1845, when O'Sullivan wrote about the, quote, fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent, the country was acquiring Texas, Oregon, California, and fighting Mexico for more land. Between the 1840s and 1860s, the U.S. increased its territory by nearly 800 million acres through annexation, military conquest, and forcing Native Americans off their land. Not sounding like amazing times for everyone, huh? So when that cutie little cozy Thanksgiving story resurfaced in the 1840s and 50s, Americans retroactively justified and romanticized the conquest of lands in the West. You see, we needed a founding myth that made westward expansion look like destiny instead of what it actually was, which we now know is genocide and land theft. But a Thanksgiving myth painted a picture where indigenous people welcomed colonizers, helped them survive, and everyone lived happily ever after. This narrative made it easier for Americans to stomach what was actually happening in real time. The Trail of Tears, the Indian Wars, the systemic destruction of indigenous nations from coast to coast. Americans believed it was our divinely ordained mission to settle and civilize the West. The first Thanksgiving story we all grew up hearing became proof that God intended for this to happen all along. Folks were all, see, the Indians wanted us here. Life's good. Except they didn't. And within just one generation of that 1621 feast, colonists were burning entire villages and massacring thousands of indigenous people. Just a reminder, I am absolutely not telling you this to ruin Thanksgiving for you or to make you feel guilty about celebrating it, okay? I'm not sitting on my high horse looking down, telling you how to feel about this holiday or how to celebrate. I'm literally recording while planning my crab leg feast, remember? We can enjoy a day of gratitude, family, and food while also understanding the real history behind it. We can hold space for both. Knowing the truth doesn't mean you have to cancel your Thanksgiving. It just means you're acknowledging the full story, not just the watered-down, sanitized version we get in elementary school. I like to think of it more like understanding what really happened makes us better informed and more empathetic people. It honors indigenous people who are still here, still fighting to have their history told accurately. And honestly, I think that's more in the spirit of gratitude than pretending everything was just like a Disney movie. So let's talk about what really happened in 1621, why the Wampanoag agreed to help the struggling English settlers in the first place, and spoiler alert, it wasn't because they wanted to make new friends and throw a bitchin' party. But first, I'm going to go back even further before 1621, back to 1614 when British fishermen had been making their way through New England and kidnapping native people to sell into slavery trade. In 1614, Captain Thomas Hunt lured Wampanoag people onto his ship with promises of trade. He then locked them below deck and sailed them to Spain, where he sold them as slaves. Among those kidnapped was a man named Tisquantum. He was from the Patuxet village, and you might know him as Squanto. Now, Tisquantum's story is pretty insane. Spanish monks heard what was happening and actually rescued him from slavery. He made it to England, where he learned English, worked as a shipbuilder and interpreter, and he spent some years bouncing between Spain, London, Newfoundland, and possibly Jamestown, then back to England before finally being able to get back home in 1619. Sadly, when he finally made it back to his village of Patuxet, he found it completely abandoned. His entire tribe had been wiped out by disease. It's possible they died of smallpox, which was a deadly disease carried over by the English, or possibly leptospirosis from contaminated water. These two things had decimated indigenous populations between 1616 and 1618. The Wampanoag lost an estimated 2/3 of their people. We're talking as many as 45,000 people in just a few short years. Tisquantum was only gone for 5 years. So imagine, you're kidnapped, you've spent 5 years trying to get home, you finally make it back, and everyone's dead. Your entire community gone. Family, friends, neighbors, everyone. Then, on top of that, the English settlers who moved into his abandoned village robbed the graves of the Wampanoag and stole food in order to survive their first years. So when the Mayflower shows up in December of 1620 and settles right on top of Tisquantum's former village, now Plymouth, the Wampanoag are hostile, rightfully so. These people have been kidnapped, enslaved, infected with deadly diseases, and now these new English people are literally living in their dead relatives' homes. And you know what? That famous 1621 feast with the friendly Indians as guests of honor? Yeah, well, the Wampanoag weren't even invited. They actually heard gunfire in the distance, and their leader, Osamequin, also called Massasoit by the colonists, brought 90 men to investigate because they thought the colonists were preparing for war. So basically 90 armed warriors showed up because they heard gunshots and thought they were about to be attacked. Instead, they realized the gunfire was just celebratory. The colonists were celebrating their harvest. So the Wampanoag killed 5 deer and brought them as a contribution and then stayed for 3 days. They actually outnumbered the colonists by about 40 people. So maybe you can imagine this wasn't some cozy dinner party. I mean, 90 armed men show up to your feast uninvited. How are you feeling? This was a tense diplomatic situation that could have become a shit show at any moment. Want a fun fact? We call this the first Thanksgiving, but it wasn't even called that until 200 years later in the 1830s. At the time, it was just a harvest celebration. It just happened to sort of include their indigenous neighbors. Now, in my research, I wondered why Osamequin agreed to help these colonists who were struggling. Why not let them fail after all they've brought upon the Wampanoags? Because he was a strategist, my dudes. It was all about cold, calculated geopolitics. You see, the plague had weakened the Wampanoag so severely that their traditional rivals, the Narragansett tribe to the west, were now threatening to subjugate them and force them to pay tribute. The Narragansetts had mostly escaped the plague, so they saw an opportunity to basically dominate the Wampanoag, who were now weakened. Forming a strategic alliance with the Pilgrims would provide the Wampanoags with guns in exchange for food and knowledge of how to survive. They'd be gaining a powerful ally against their enemy. It certainly wasn't a friendship, it was about survival. They had to do what they had to do. Tisquantum spoke fluent English, so he understood both cultures and was essentially an orphan with nowhere else to go, so he taught the colonists how to plant corn, fertilize soil with fish, he taught them where to hunt and fish, and how to navigate the fur trade. Now, according to some historians, Tisquantum was power hungry. They say he manipulated the fear between colonists and indigenous people, and that he demanded tributes, threatened people by saying he could unleash plague, and even spread rumors that Osamequin was plotting to attack the English. When Osamequin found out, he was pissed, so much so that he allegedly demanded the colonists execute Tisquantum. When Governor William Bradford refused to do that, it ultimately endangered the entire treaty. Some historians even speculate that Tisquantum's death in 1622 was from poison by his own people. So when we learned about Squanto as a friendly Indian who saved the Pilgrims, his real story involves being kidnapped, sold as a slave, and it also includes genocide, political manipulation, betrayal, and possibly assassination by his own tribe. I guess I can see why they didn't get into the thick of that in second grade. You know, not exactly a feel-good story, is it? Remember how I said it only took one generation for things to fall apart after that feast? Buckle up, kiddos. Just 15 years after the feast of 1621, the English showed exactly what they were capable of. And this is important because it sets the tone for everything that came after. In what is now Connecticut, the Pequots were known as the Fox people. They had prospered for thousands of years and controlled about 250 square miles along the eastern coast. The Pequots were powerful economic players, and they were involved in lucrative wampum trade with both English and Dutch settlers. Wampum, if you're not familiar, refers to traditional shell beads made from polished shells. It served as currency, jewelry, and a tool for recording history, agreements, and ceremonies. The colors of the beads were a visual representation of important messages and treaties. Kind of like those jelly bracelets in school. Do you remember those? All the colors meant something different. By 1637, tensions escalated, and on April 23rd, about 200 Pequot warriors attacked Wethersfield, Connecticut, killing 6 men and 3 women. They were all unarmed civilians, so obviously this enraged the settlers. And what happened next is absolutely horrific. It's known as the Mystic Massacre. On May 26, 1637, just before the sun rose, Captain John Mason led 90 English soldiers along with 70 Mohegan warriors and about 200 Narragansett allies to attack a fortified Pequot village at Mystic. There were 2 Pequot forts. One held mainly Pequot warriors, and the other was primarily for women, children, and elders. Can you guess which one Mason targeted? That's right, the one with women, children, and elders. The warriors were away at the time with Chief Sassacus. This village was surrounded by a wooden palisade, which is just a strong fence made of pointed wooden stakes, and Mason had ordered his men to set the entire village on fire while blocking their 2 only exits. While the fire was spreading, trapped Pequots were shot as they tried to escape by climbing over the walls. Those who did manage to escape were killed by the Narragansett fighters. Between 400 and 700 Pequots were killed during this one attack, most of them women, children, and elders. Captain John Underhill justified the attack, saying, quote, "Sometimes the scripture declareth women and children must perish with their parents." His version of women and children first was to kill them, not save them. Instead, he used the Bible to justify burning children alive. Pretty sick and twisted. After the massacre, a treaty was signed in 1638 by the English, Mohegan, and Narragansett. This was called the Treaty of Hartford, and it divided up surviving Pequots among the other tribes and literally outlawed the Pequot name. Survivors were forbidden from calling themselves Pequot or even returning to their homeland, and those survivors were prisoners, many of whom were sold into slavery off in Bermuda or the West Indies. The colonial authorities classified the Pequot as extinct, basically a cultural genocide. And although they were considered extinct, I think it's important to note that they are not, in fact, extinct. They're still here. The Mashantucket Pequot and the Pokanoket Pequot are federally recognized tribes in Connecticut. Also, I'm not 100% confident on my pronunciation of these indigenous names, so I do apologize. If you know the correct way and send it my way, please do. I Googled some of these, but I don't know just how accurate they are. Anyway, the Mystic Massacre shaped colonial and U.S. policy toward Native Americans for centuries to come. It established that the English were willing to use war, including mass murder of civilians, against indigenous peoples. Meanwhile, back in Plymouth in Massachusetts, life for the Wampanoag was amazing. Psych. Life was getting progressively worse for them. The livestock being imported from England, like pigs and cattle, were constantly destroying Wampanoag farms, food stores, and hunting grounds, and colonists did almost nothing to stop it despite regular complaints. And actually, the colonizers demanded punishment when Wampanoag hunters killed livestock in their traps. Basically, the Wampanoag were expected to just watch their food supply get destroyed and sit back and take it. On top of that, colonial missionaries were constantly trying to force their Christianity on them. Metacom, sometimes referred to as Metacomet, who the English called King Philip, specifically said that he and other Wampanoag leaders had a great fear that any of their people, quote, should be called or forced to be called Christian Indians. Tensions got so high that in 1671, the English demanded that the Wampanoag surrender their weapons, which they did. And you'd think that'd be enough, right? Wrong, bitch. In 1675, shit really hit the fan. I know. How could it get worse, right? Well, it does. In January, a Christian Wampanoag man named John Sassaman was found murdered. Sassaman had warned Plymouth colony that Metacom was planning to attack English settlements, and 3 Wampanoag men were convicted of Sassaman's murder by a jury of 12 colonists and 6 Indigenous elders, and they were executed by hanging in June of that year. Metacom, who I don't know if I mentioned, is the son of Osamequin, the leader of the Wampanoag, and much like his father, Metacom's pissed. On June 24, 1675, Wampanoag warriors attacked the border settlement of Swansea, Massachusetts, and massacred English colonists. I couldn't find an exact number of just how many. Some sources say 7, some say 9, Wikipedia said 3. Regardless, this was the beginning of what would become King Philip's War. This war is considered to be the bloodiest conflict per capita in U.S. history. Over the next year, more than 600 English settlers died and 1,200 homes were burned, and an estimated 3,000 Native Americans also died. More than half of all New England settlements were attacked by Indigenous warriors, and about a dozen towns in Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies were reduced to ashes. And I'm sorry, but it gets worse. The Narragansett tribe had been allies with the English against the Pequots back in 1637, if you recall. They had signed a neutrality treaty with Massachusetts Bay Colony in October of 1675, and they were just trying to stay out of the war. But they had sheltered many Wampanoag women, children, and refugees, and some of their warriors had even participated in raids, so the colonists did not trust them. On December 19, 1675, a combined force of over 1,000 colonial militia from Plymouth, Connecticut, and Massachusetts Bay, along with 150 Pequot and Mohegan warriors, were led to the Narragansett's main winter camp, which is now West Kingston, Rhode Island. It's noted that this day was extremely bitter, cold, and stormy. Temperatures had frozen the natural moat around the Narragansett fort, and this allowed troops to pass through easily, resulting in 600 Narragansett people being killed, including elders, women, and children. Many were brutally burned alive when their fort was set on fire by the English. The tribe's entire winter food supply was destroyed, so survivors were left to starve to death or die of exposure in the freezing swamp. This wasn't just combat, this was genocide. Extermination known as the Great Swamp Fight. By August of 1676, the war was essentially over, and thousands of Indigenous people had been killed, wounded, or captured and sold into slavery. It decimated the Narragansett, Wampanoag, and many smaller tribes, and essentially ended Indigenous resistance in southern New England. This paved the way for additional English settlements. Within just 54 years of that 1621 harvest feast, colonists had nearly wiped out the Wampanoag. Native Americans lost their political independence and most of their territory. So when we talk about Thanksgiving and that cozy cutie story of pilgrims and Indians sharing a meal, this is what happened after. Not in some distant future, it happened within one lifetime. This is why, for many Native Americans, Thanksgiving is not a celebration, it's a day of mourning. So, how did Thanksgiving become a national holiday then? It sounds fucking horrendous, right? Well, maybe you've heard of Sarah Josepha Hale, the mother of Thanksgiving. Sarah was born Sarah Josepha Buell in 1788 in New Hampshire. She actually had pretty progressive parents for the time. Get this. They believed women should be educated the same as men. Crazy, right? So because of that, Sarah received an actual education, which was extremely rare for girls at the time. Sarah eventually married a lawyer, David Hale, and together they had 5 children. Sadly, a tragedy struck in 1822 when David suddenly passed away, and Sarah was left a widow at 34 with 5 kids to support. Oofda. And back then, women didn't have a lot of options, so Sarah turned to writing. And not just writing in her diary or something. She actually became one of America's most influential voices in the 19th century. She became the editor of Godey's Ladies' Book in 1837. This was the magazine for women at the time. Millions of readers. This was like being the editor of Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and Good Housekeeping all rolled into one. And she held this position for 40 years. She also wrote this little poem. Maybe you've heard of it. Mary Had a Little Lamb. Well, Sarah had a relentless campaign to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. Starting in 1846, she would dedicate her column to Thanksgiving every November and positioned it as this pious, patriotic holiday that would unite Americans. She wrote editorial after editorial and thousands of personal letters by hand, because obviously no email at the time, to governors, state legislators, influential clergy members, other magazine editors, basically anyone with influence or power. She also wrote to every single president at the time. Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, they all received handwritten personal letters from her campaigning for Thanksgiving to become a national holiday. But like most women, she was ignored or declined. This went on for 17 years. I wish I had that confidence to be ignored and rejected for 17 years and still press on. Get it, girl. So what exactly was her vision? Well, Sarah saw Thanksgiving as more than just a holiday. It was a way to create a standardized American identity. She wanted to unite the country around shared values, specifically white Protestant Northern values centered on domesticity, simplicity, and rural life over urban sophistication. Very trad wife of her. She would run these stories in her magazines depicting Black servants with Roman Catholics and Southerners all celebrating Thanksgiving together. In her vision, they were becoming, quote, more American by celebrating Thanksgiving together. But let's be real here, she meant becoming more like white Protestant Northerners. Basically, a cultural assimilation wrapped in a holiday feast. And then I wondered, why Thursday, Miss Hale? Well, because Thursday meant enough time for women to prepare a substantial meal and still have time to prepare Sunday dinner. She was logistical, so I'll give her that. But guess what? She never actually associated turkey with the holiday. In fact, she preferred chicken and oysters. The whole turkey obsession came later. But before that, someone needed to say yes to her, right? So let me take you on another journey. The year is 1863. The country is absolutely torn apart by the Civil War. Brothers fighting brothers. Families divided. The nation is literally at war with itself. Homie Sarah saw an opportunity and she reached for the moon. On September 28th, 1863, she wrote to another president. Not sure if you've heard of him, Abraham Lincoln. This time, her letter hit different. She wrote, "Permit me, as editress of the Ladies' Book, to request a few minutes of your precious time while laying before you a subject of deep interest. This subject is to have the day of our annual Thanksgiving made a national and fixed Union festival." Lincoln was dealing with the Civil War at the time, plus the day after Christmas the year before in Mankato, Minnesota, he had approved the hanging of 38 Dakota men following the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. This was the largest mass execution in U.S. history and ordered after Lincoln commuted the death sentences of over 260 other Dakota men convicted of murder and rape. So he was looking for anything that might help unify the country. Sarah's letter was basically telling him, here's an idea, sir. What if we have a day where everyone, the North and the South, could come together and just be grateful and remind Americans we're all part of the same nation? It only took Lincoln 5 days to issue a proclamation declaring the last Thursday of November as a national day of Thanksgiving. He wrote that Americans should, quote, take time for gratitude in the midst of a civil war of unequaled magnitude and severity. But don't get too excited. It was only for 1 year. It was just going to be a one-time thing for 1863, but then Lincoln issued another proclamation in 1864, and then every president after him just kind of kept doing it. It was more of a tradition, not law or a holiday. Now fast forward to 1939. We're in the Great Depression, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt is worried about the economy. Duh. That year, November had 5 Thursdays, and Thanksgiving would fall on the last one, November 30th. Retailers panicked. They were all, oh no! This only gives 3 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That is simply not enough time for holiday shopping. We're going to lose money. The humanity. FDR was standing on business, and he was just trying to help the economy. So he decided to move Thanksgiving up a week to the second to last Thursday of November, the 23rd. That way, the Christmas shopping season could be expanded by a week. Problem solved, right? Wrong again. Americans lost their damn minds. You may remember from my Veterans Day episode, we Americans go hard for our traditions. 16 states straight up refused to recognize FDR's new date. They were all, nah, we're celebrating the real Thanksgiving on the last Thursday. So for 1939 and 1940, the country celebrated Thanksgiving on 2 different days, depending on which state you lived in. Some people even called the new date Franksgiving as a dig to FDR. Families were torn. College football games got messed up because teams were in different states celebrating on different days. Thanksgiving? More like thanks chaos, am I right? But finally, Congress came to the rescue. In 1941, Congress said, okay, we need to settle this once and for all. And on December 26, 1941, just a couple of weeks after Pearl Harbor, while we're entering World War II, Congress passed a law permanently establishing Thanksgiving as a federal holiday on the 4th Thursday of November. Not the last Thursday, the 4th. This way, even during the 5 Thursday years of November, we are all on the same page. So it took Sarah 17 years of relentless campaigning, a civil war, Lincoln looking for national unity, FDR trying to boost the economy during the Great Depression, a 2-year period of national confusion, and Congress finally stepping in during World War II. Well, we got there, baby. We finally have our Thanksgiving. As we know it today, Thanksgiving is technically legally less than 100 years old. Yet, we always reference the feast back in 1621. Pretty wild, right? Now, let me backtrack to the turkey thing for a second. If Sarah preferred chicken and oysters, how the hell did turkey become the Thanksgiving bird? Well, I found out it's actually kind of her doing anyway. In her 1827 novel, Northwood, Sarah devoted an entire chapter to describing her ideal New England Thanksgiving, the roasted turkey placed at the head of the table. Even though she personally might have preferred other birds, she was writing about what she thought represented the perfect traditional Thanksgiving. When William Bradford's journals were reprinted in 1856 after being lost for a century, people were wanting Thanksgiving to become a national holiday just like Sarah. And Bradford wrote about how colonists had hunted wild turkeys in autumn of 1621, and Even though he never specifically said they ate turkey at that feast, people just kind of connected the dots. Turkey had some practical advantages. They were plentiful, easy to hunt, and a turkey could feed more people than a chicken. Plus, unlike chickens, they weren't raised for eggs, and unlike cows, they didn't produce milk, which made turkey meat relatively cheap. There was also this whole nationalist angle going on. George Washington proclaimed a one-off Thanksgiving in 1789. There was an intentional effort back then to get Americans to start thinking of turkey as American cuisine, to distinguish our developing culture from England, where most people wouldn't be eating turkey. It was uniquely North American, our thing, and that was very important to them. There's a quote that's tied to Alexander Hamilton. There's no proof he said it, but it's tied to him. It's, "No citizen of the United States should refrain from turkey on Thanksgiving Day." Whether he actually said it or not, it kind of captures the vibe. Turkey was becoming the American bird for the American holiday. As Thanksgiving rose in popularity during the 1800s, so did the turkey. By 1857, turkey had become part of the traditional dinner in New England, and by 1885, Thanksgiving was frequently referred to as Turkey Day. I thought we came up with that in the 1990s, but it was the 1880s. Today, Americans spend nearly $1 billion on turkey for Thanksgiving, consuming about 46 million turkeys on Thanksgiving Day alone, according to Wikipedia. So yeah, the turkey obsession came from a combination of Sarah's ideal vision, nationalist pride, practical economics, lost journals being rediscovered at the perfect time, and eventually industrial agriculture making turkey cheap and accessible to everyone. The turkey. She's an icon. She's a legend. She is the moment. All right, so we have discovered Thanksgiving through its history, how it became a holiday, and now, if you will, let me gab your ears off a bit more and talk about what we actually do on Thanksgiving today. Believe it or not, it is quite different from 1621, and it also varies depending on where you live in the States. First, what did they actually eat back then? Unfortunately, they didn't make beautiful, detailed menus in Canva, but we do have some historical clues. Their meal likely included crops that the settlers had harvested, whatever bird they managed to hunt, and the 5 deer that the Wampanoag brought. Not a single turkey is mentioned in any of the primary historical sources from 1621, just fowl, as in some type of bird. Pilgrims' weapons weren't really great for hunting turkeys anyway, and they might have been rare back then. They likely had duck, goose, venison, and maybe whatever seafood they could catch, like clams, mussels, or maybe even lobster. So my crab meal isn't so offbeat after all. Now for the sides. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, pecans, pie. They weren't available to them back then. No mashed taters, no sweet potato casserole, and worst of all, no pumpkin pie. They might have had some squash, corn, maybe some berries, but that's probably it. Fast forward to today, and the modern Thanksgiving dinner usually consists of turkey, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, corn, green beans, cranberry sauce, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. Mine has a half a gallon of Cool Whip on top. Most of us have probably had variations of this. In fact, there are Thanksgiving ice cream flavors that feature turkey and cranberries because it's such an iconic duo for Thanksgiving. Over the years, each region of the US kind of has created their signature specialties. In the South, you'll likely find mac and cheese and pecan pie on the table. I do love me some homemade mac and cheese myself, so that sounds delicious. Up in the Great Lakes region, wild rice stuffing is pretty popular, which makes sense since wild rice is native to that area. And for a lot of households, it's not about turkey at all anymore. Some families serve ham, roasted goose, duck, or chicken instead. On the West Coast, Dungeness crab is popular as a main dish since crab season starts in early November. I will say, when we lived in Oregon and went out looking for crab for our first Thanksgiving there, we almost couldn't find any. And now that makes sense. Thanksgiving has also evolved to include more international dishes as we become more diverse. In many households, you might find tamales, collard greens, kimchi, or whatever reflects a family's cultural background. And I think that is very beautiful. So, which traditions have remained the same all these years? The big ones are pretty obvious. People still travel across the country to be with their loved ones for family gatherings. It's one of the busiest travel times of the year. Whether it's 2 people or 50 people, we're still coming together to share food and express gratitude. Whether you go around the table and say what you're thankful for, or you just appreciate being together, the spirit of thankfulness is still there. Another tradition, which I think is just so cute, is the ceremonial pardon of the turkey. This has been a formal tradition since 1989 when George H.W. Bush was president. Every year, the president receives 2 live domestic turkeys as a gift from the National Turkey Federation and then ceremonially pardons them so they can live out their lives on a farm instead of becoming dinner. It's bizarre and wholesome at the same time, which I think describes me perfectly as well. Rumor has it, the unofficial beginning of this tradition started with Lincoln's son Tad. Allegedly, he had asked his father to spare a turkey that he named Jack from a holiday meal. Lincoln said, "Sure thing, son," and pardoned the turkey. I couldn't find anything stating this is factually correct, more so folklore, but it's cute, right? Last year's turkeys were named Peach and Blossom, and they were raised by the NTF's chairman, John Zimmerman, in Northfield, Minnesota. This year, according to USA Today, the Office of the First Lady wanted constituents to have a voice in naming this year's pardoned turkeys. The choices were Sugar and Spice, Pumpkin and Pie, Gobble and Waddle, my favorite, and Acorn and Squash. When I last checked, Gobble and Waddle were the winners, but we shall see. As of recording, the pardon should take place on Tuesday, November 25th. Today, if you're listening on release day. Aside from food and turkey, we have a lot of other modern traditions that have absolutely nothing to do with the original feast of 1621. They might even put pilgrims from 1621 into a coma, but I think they're great. Parades are huge for a lot of holidays, and Thanksgiving is no exception. Probably the most famous is the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York City. Giant balloons of various characters float above the crowd all through Manhattan. Performances from famous bands and musicians, along with Broadway show performances, and a bunch of high school marching bands are also included. Santa usually shows up. I've heard rumors that we'll see some floats and balloons featuring K-pop demon hunters, Stranger Things, and giant Labubus. This has been tradition since 1924 when Macy's employees, many of whom were immigrants, wanted to celebrate the store's newly expanded Herald Square location in a big way. It was such a huge success that we've been doing it ever since, except for a 3-year hiatus during World War II. We needed rubber for bullets and stuff. For a lot of families, turning on NBC and watching the parade marks the official start of Thanksgiving. Watching football games has been a huge Thanksgiving tradition for a lot of families throughout generations. Many families mark the Bears vs. Lions game in 1934 as the start of the tradition, as it was nationally broadcast on the radio, but college football on Thanksgiving has been a tradition since the first Thanksgiving football game in 1876 between Yale and Princeton. For this next tradition, this is a trigger warning. Turkey trots. You either love them or you hate them, or maybe you're indifferent, I don't know. These are anything from 5Ks to fun runs to half marathons, and they all happen on Thanksgiving morning. Some of these trots are for charity, and some of them are punishments. It's for participants to earn their Thanksgiving meal or burn off calories before they even eat. Genius? Hilarious? Torture? I will let you decide for yourself. A newer tradition that's become more and more popular is Friendsgiving. If you're unfamiliar, it's like Thanksgiving, but for your chosen family, your friends. Whether it's in addition to your Thanksgiving or in place of it, it's great. I saw a thread recently, though, that had me giggling. It said something like, "Nothing like Friendsgiving season to remind you that you don't belong to any friend groups." Ain't that true? A lot of families spend part of Thanksgiving volunteering at food banks, homeless shelters, or community centers that host holiday meals. And many communities hold annual food drives and organize Thanksgiving dinners for anyone to enjoy a warm meal. I think this is probably the most in the spirit of gratitude tradition we have. And whether you think it's a tradition or not, the post-meal nap is a tradition for me. After all that cooking and eating, many people retreat to their lazy boys for a midday nap. For those who enjoy turkey, it's high in tryptophan, which helps release chemicals like melatonin and makes you eepy. But don't put all the blame on the turkey, okay? Many sides are high in sugar, which can also increase your tiredness. So if someone gives you shit for napping, just tell them it's an important tradition of Thanksgiving. Everyone deserves a good rest. So as you can see, Thanksgiving has evolved so much over the years. Parades, football, running, napping, they're all common now. But throughout the years, the core has remained the same, and that's coming together. Whether that's with family, friends, community, your pets, your demons, whatever. Whether you're eating traditional turkey or crab legs, watching football, or binging the new Stranger Things, it's all about being together. We have the choice to celebrate however we want. We can honor this holiday while also acknowledging its complicated and painful history. We can be grateful for what we have while recognizing what was taken from others to get here. And I think that's what makes Thanksgiving meaningful. It's not the mythical story we learned growing up. It's the conscious choice we make to gather, to be grateful, and just to do better. How sweet is that? Now, after all we've learned today, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how Indigenous people view Thanksgiving today. Because here's the thing, while a lot of us are gathering around the table, there's a whole other observance happening that most Americans don't even know about. For the last 50-some years, the Wampanoag Indians have marked Thanksgiving as a national day of mourning. Since 1970, many Native people have gathered at the statue of Massasoit in Plymouth each Thanksgiving Day to remember their ancestors and honor Wampanoag strength. They're remembering genocide, stolen land, broken treaties, families that were torn apart, and cultures nearly destroyed. For many, it's a painful reminder of the devastating impact of European colonization on Indigenous people. I mean, can you blame them? Kidnapping, diseases, the Mystic Massacre, the Great Swamp Fight, King Philip's War, enslavement, and the near total destruction of their people. All of that just because some whiteys with bad hygiene decided this land was theirs for the taking. Like I said earlier, this isn't about being anti-Thanksgiving or trying to be a wet blanket. I chose Thanksgiving as the subject of today's episode because to me it's about remembering what actually happened instead of a mystical fairy tale we're told, and honoring the resilience of Indigenous people who survived unthinkable horrors. I mean, we owe a lot to them, you know? The Wampanoag have been fighting for hundreds of years to dispel the colonial version of their history. They've been fighting to have their true story told accurately. I mean, wouldn't you want that? Thanksgiving is literally based on their ancestor story, so that's why I think it's so important to make sure we learn the truth. And if you didn't know, November is actually Native American Heritage Month. And Black Friday, ever heard of her? It's actually Native American Heritage Day, which is a congressionally established national observance and was established by the Native American Heritage Day Act of 2009, which was signed into law by President Obama. How many people even know it exists? I didn't. We have this entire month dedicated to Native American heritage and a specific day right after Thanksgiving, but most Americans have no idea. So maybe this Thanksgiving, when you're sitting around your table with all your beautiful foods and drinks with family and friends, maybe pause. Take a moment, not to feel guilty. I'm not trying to guilt trip anyone here. Just take a moment to remember and to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people whose land we're on and whose history we've sanitized for our own comfort. Also, side note, if you're looking for something other than football or Stranger Things to watch on Thanksgiving, might I suggest Addams Family Values. I know it's not technically a Thanksgiving movie, but it is a really good watch. Also, if you're a little spooky girly, check out the movie Thanksgiving, the horror movie. It's a fun watch, okay? So even with the horrors we've learned, Thanksgiving is still an important holiday about coming together and being thankful. We can make it what we want, and I think that's pretty cool. That's quite American, if you ask me. All right, that is all I have for today's episode. My leg is waking up from falling asleep, and I feel like I could throw a table on top of it and it would make it feel better. I hope you have an amazing Thanksgiving, and I hope you learned something interesting today. Enjoy your turkey or crab or oysters or lentils or pie or whatever. Take a nap. You deserve it. I hope your favorite football team wins. And if you go Black Friday shopping, make sure you don't get trampled, okay? The deals aren't worth it. And a little birdie named Hopper told me if you're interested in booking some travel plans in the future, wait until Tuesday after Thanksgiving, okay? We will chat next week. And until then, happy Thanksgiving. Love ya. Love you. Bye.